We do paid search for larger spending marketers. Typically, our clients spend $30,000 a month, up to millions of dollars a month. We've been growing pretty rapidly. We're on 500 and growing fast 500. Just so I know, if you're all in the front row, I could see exactly what all your managers said, whether you're affiliates or merchants. How many of you are merchants? All right, and affiliates? All right. So, just so you know, who I'm talking to, the network. Okay. So, the first thing is that there's no argument to whether or not increased screen real estate in the search engine results page is beneficial to the marketer. Clearly it is, right? If you can find a way to increase your screen real estate without actually dramatically escalating costs, you're going to end up with an overall positive ROI due to the increased screen real estate. This is particularly true when you find a way to coordinate your messaging across a combination of organic, your primary paid listings, and then any secondary paid listings that are there. As long as the messaging is actually diverse, as your messaging is increasingly different in regards to promotional offers, your overall lift tends to increase even further. So the question is, what is your cost-benefit analysis of adding incremental screen real estate to the search, particularly on the PPC side? So the objective of today's discussion, which is, was originally hopefully arguing with somebody, so somebody in the audience not choose to argue for fun, was really about, how do we maximize for the merchant, since it's their dollars that I'm talking about stewarding the merchant's dollars, I'm sort of in the camp of the merchant. How do we maximize profitability within the ecosystem that we have? Google, Yahoo, Microsoft, the ability to potentially have secondary listings as long as they meet the guidelines that the engines have put in place. So, how many additional placements should there be? Who should control primary and secondary ads that are running? So, affiliates and performance players are often used to supplement either your in-house or your primary SEM agency's listings. So, a lot of times what appeals to a marketer about the idea of empowering sort of super affiliates to do this sort of paid search arbitrage is the idea that they're doing it, quote, risk-free, right? They're eliminating any risk. All they have to do is pay on performance. In reality, it's not quite that simple because there are clear interaction effects when incremental listings start to show up in the paid search results. So an affiliate marketing free-for-all where you basically say to search affiliates, knock yourself out, go ahead and do whatever you want. That's been proven time and time again to create bid escalations and all sorts of interaction with that. So the question is, how do you gain the incremental search volume in a way that you compensate the affiliate fairly, potentially, and you also make sure you profit maximize as a merchant and have no CPC bid escalation. So there are basically a couple of options that you have available. And you can just have your in-house PPC SEM and outsourced agency that's doing fee-based work, typically a percentage of spend. You can have some kind of an affiliate or performance agency doing all research on a performance basis, some kind of a performance-based SEM agency. You can have sort of controlled chaos, which is putting in place some kind of a bidding guideline for affiliates who are going to be doing search arbitrage. Then there's, of course, the total free-for-all. We know that free-for-all doesn't work. And there's a fair amount of data coming in that even trying to control the chaos is not the optimal way to increase your visibility. So one thing I recommend to merchants who are considering sort of how do I utilize additional players within the search results is first you have to decide who and how you're managing your primary listings. Because until you've got your primary listings optimized, anything else you're doing really is just going to further degrade your overall results more likely than not. So you have to decide, okay, how should I manage my primary campaign? Should it be an in-house team with outsourced technology? Should it be an outsourced SEM agency? You have to review your campaign first to understand, do I really feel like I have all my ducks in a row on the primary campaign. The reason that's important is because obviously the listings you want highest up in the search results, in those hot zones of the heat map that I showed you, where all the clicks and visibility come in, those you want to be your highest converting, highest profitability listings. And so if you're actually really bad at search engine marketing, but you just want to be the top because you want to own it, that's really not smart either. You should be the best that you can be with your own listings before you start empowering secondary players. So let's do the math on the primary, right? The question when deciding, who's going to help you manage that $100,000, or how are you going to allocate that $100,000, really should be an all-in analysis. And what I mean by an all-in analysis, it's the fact that if you're going to use any external parties and or any external technologies, the net gain that you get from adding something else to the mix or somebody else into the mix should be positive. So if there's some fees associated with some third party's involvement, that sort of takes down your spend off of the $100,000 and reduces the amount of money that's actually going into the media or the pay clicks, if you want to call it that. So you need to do an analysis of sort of fees inclusive on top of your media spend, assuming you're a fixed budget. It's easiest to do the analysis on a fixed budget basis. So what I would mention is expertise matters a lot in paid search. So it is quite possible that an agency or some kind of third-party assistance can actually dramatically improve your results far in excess of whatever cost is associated with that technology or that expertise. Some of it comes through sort of labor-intensive, strategic and tactical processes like better account structures, better creative. Other lift that you might get in the efficiency and effectiveness of a campaign might come from more technology-driven improvements, things like smarter bidding, right? A bidding engine that's an algorithm that's able to outmaneuver your competition more effectively, or some kind of segmentation model-driven bidding engine that understands predictively which segments of all the clicks that you could buy are actually going to have the highest profit profile. I'm not going to ask you to look at these numbers up close because I have to run up to the screen to see them, but essentially I did a little analysis of if you have a technology and a team, either a technology or a team or a combination of both, that can achieve a higher return on ad spend, even though they're perhaps more expensive to use that team and technology, often you'll end up with a higher net search profit. So this is an example where I basically took, let's say, $100,000 of spend, compared like a 5%, which would typically be like a high-end technology licensing fee, with more of a full-service agency approach that might include some kind of technology as well. And the reality is that it's very often that you'll see at least a 20% gain in effectiveness and efficiency between sort of a superior solution and an inferior solution. As a matter of fact, I often see situations where there's more than 50% efficiency gains, but for the purposes, let's say it's conservative. So that would raise the ROAS from a 5 to a 6. When you do the math, you realize that that's the difference between having an after marketing dollars full profitability difference from an $189,000 to $203,000. Right? So that means that even though you're paying a vendor and a technology provider more, you actually make more money if they're better at their job. Right? So that, to some extent, might encourage you to say, well, that's great. If I bring in more vendors and I have vendors that are really great at what they do, my overall net profit goes up. Well, as long as there aren't these bidding interactions. So this would be sort of an analysis you would do on your primary campaign first, to understand sort of who should be managing my primary campaign. Do I feel like my in-house team is really best in breed, that they'll be able to achieve maximum results? If not, it sort of complicates the sort of secondary listings issue for a variety of reasons. The primary one is that you're essentially shackling the secondary player based on whatever you're able to accomplish in your primary listings. So when you think about optimizing, just bids, for example, in a bidding landscape, a bidding landscape is like a living, breathing ecosystem. So just using, for example, day part, day of week data, this just shows a different conversion rate by times of day, day of week. Right? So if you're using platforms that are sort of rudimentary set it, forget it type technology, and not using technology that can take advantage of these huge swings in conversion rate by time of day or day of week, you're basically like a stopped clock. You're right twice a day as the reality passes your data point. So on your primary campaign, the reason I show this is your primary campaign is probably going to be, if it's being managed correctly, highly dynamic. It's not going to be a set and forget. It's not going to be I set my bid at $1.65 and I just leave it because this is, this keyword works at $1.65. The reality is that at certain times, if you're not in top position, you should be bidding more than $1.65, and at other times, you should probably be bidding less than $1.65. If you take it to the next level, you can actually do the same analysis. That was just conversion rate. You can do that same analysis based on ROI or cost per order or revenue per dollar spent, meaning that different times of the day, different days of the week, or potentially different geographies actually have highly different metrics. So it's not a matter of just, again, setting a bid, thinking about it on a sort of macro basis, and then being able to work from that. The other thing that's important to take into account on the primary campaign basis is, do you, as the sort of owner of the primary campaign, or the person who takes responsibility for the P&L for the primary campaign, do you want to take into account some of the things that are more difficult to track? Things that don't fire a pixel on a conversion page, like land orders that go beyond the life of a cookie, or cookie loss based on either people using cleansing programs, corporate firewalls, or the fact that they were shopping online at work and then going home online and making a purchase on a completely different computer. All sorts of factors that are sort of a little more fuzzy can impact how you set your ROI targets from the perspective of your own sort of owned and operated campaign. And of course, the branding impact of search, right? Direct response marketers rarely factor in the brand impact of search, but the reality is it's there. So once you've got your success metrics, you do these analysis, you do a geo-segmentation, you look at engines, you look at position, you do potentially advanced segmentation in Microsoft, you're going to have a highly dynamic primary campaign. So now you want to go back for seconds, right? You want to get secondary listings out there that can improve your overall success. The real question is, you and or your agency that was managing your primary campaigns has obviously learned a tremendous amount in doing all the segmentation modeling, segmentation analysis, right? You've learned what days of the week work, you've learned what times of day work, you've learned that, Boston is worth, 1.2 times what Chicago is worth from a visitor's perspective, right? Do you empower your secondary players with that data, or do you keep it to yourself? It's a difficult decision. You have to decide, do you want to actually share data in that direction and empower them with knowledge? If you're paying them on a performance basis, which often power affiliates do get paid that way, how are they making a bid decision, and are the bid decisions that they're making impacting the decisions that your bidding algorithm is going to be making? Are they going to be interaction effects? There's a bid escalation scenario that shows up a lot when secondary players are empowered with regards to search. So if you have a simplified model, you can sort of create simplified rules, like don't bid more than $1, don't bid more than 65 cents, or whatever you want. Once you start to move to these highly dynamic segmented models, you may not even know how much you're bidding on Tuesdays for people in Boston at 3 o'clock in the morning, right? I mean, you may be having interaction effects that you don't even know about if you're trying to use an oversimplified method. So, because you may have thousands of segments being automated by a platform. And if the technology that's managing your affiliates systems doesn't know what the technology is managing your primary systems is doing, the likelihood of this inadvertent bid escalation is much higher. The other question is, what if you're actually doing sort of a more mediocre job than you knew, and because they have a great landing page or a great offer or whatever, something that really resonates with the audience, there's the possibility that the affiliate's listing actually outperforms yours, in which case, if you were making these decisions in a fully transparent environment, you would actually say, listen, you take the number 2 slot, I'll take 5, because you're better than I am. Right? Your listing is actually converting better than I am, and we should try to figure out how to work that out and compensate each other appropriately. However, most people who run Empower search affiliates run them in a completely opaque manner, right? And this is pay-per-click arbitrage. But you can't see what that affiliate is earning. You can't see what they're bidding. You can't see anything. I mean, Google is opaque enough as it is, and Yahoo and Microsoft are opaque enough as it is without adding incremental opacity to the ecosystem. The reason that matters, you might be like, well, what's the difference? I only pay on performance. Well, if you're trying to maximize total yield of the SERP, right, that secondary listing you want to have in a high enough place where it gets visibility, but not high enough that it interferes with your primary, right? And if there are certain keywords that you would basically, let's assume you've got 2 scenarios. One is where you're paying somebody to manage that second listing on a percentage of spend basis. That sort of fixes that fee at, let's say, 15%, right, typical agency fee. At least you know, right, because of the transparency, that there's 15% of those dollars are going to pay the person who's managing that. In an opaque scenario, what happens is you have no idea whether that person's leaving themselves a 5% margin, a 15% margin, or a 30% margin. True, you're only paying on results, but what happens is if that person leaves themselves excessive margin, they're bidding less, right? Because they may get lower volume, but they're being very conservative with their own money, because after all, a search affiliate is basically risking that that listing will work for them or not, right? They're putting their own money on the line. So typically, search affiliates leave themselves 30 or 40%, or 30 or 40 points of margin. So that opacity, not knowing whether they're leaving themselves 15% or 30%, impacts your ability to fully monetize the search engine results page. So here's an example of showing how a typical ad rank and quality score scenario would look. The reality is that because they use predicted click-through rates to calculate predicted eCPM at Google, the position actually has often much more to do with the predicted click-through rate than it does with the bid, right? So any kind of simplistic bid capping really doesn't reflect what Google is going to do in relationship to seeing a particular ad, right? What Google does is it basically first normalizes all the predicted click-through rates to assume that everyone had the same position. So what that means is obviously they know that a top position always gets a higher click-through rate than lower position. So what they want to do is they want to normalize that, create a level playing field for the purposes of calculating which ads are most relevant. Because you've ever heard Google people speak, it's their mantra, relevancy, relevancy, relevancy. So the ad with the highest predicted click-through rate is deemed to be the most relevant. And so they calculate that score after normalizing the data that they can find. And they create a predicted eCPM, a predicted click-through rate, and a predicted eCPM, and that's how they rank the ads. So that's why if you guys all got together, we raised $200 million right now, we decided to create an online shoe store to compete with Zappos and Nordstrom, right? We would probably have to bid twice as high for the same keyword as Zappos and Nordstrom do, because they have a brand that's associated with shoes already. And so consumers are much more likely to click on that brand than they would be on our listings, even if we did a great job. Maybe it would be double, maybe it would be only 30 or 40% more. But that illustrates the point, right? As you start to take secondary listings and put them into the ecosystem, it's not just about bid. It's about bid and predicted click-through rate, which is also, coincidentally, correlates with predicted eCPM, i.e. how much money does Google make, or Yahoo or Microsoft. The other thing you have to think about when you're going to start empowering arbitrage affiliates is who's learning from the data, right? We illustrated earlier how important it was for you to be doing segmentation modeling to understand, which geographies, times of day do better from both a conversion rate perspective and from an ROAS perspective, i.e. size of the shopping cart, for example, or profitable items in the shopping cart. if the more you're empowering sort of arbitrage players for either your primary or secondary campaigns, the less likely it is that you'll have that data, right? You may have aggregate level data, i.e. I paid my affiliate $45,000 this month and they generated $750,000 worth of revenue, but that's just at the aggregate level. If you don't know what levers, what triggers are generating that return, you'll never be able to leverage that data in what you're doing yourself. And that even extends beyond potentially search marketing. There may be other types of marketing you're doing where the data you learn through search could be used to empower banner campaigns, for example. If we determine that Boston indexes at a 1.5 against the national average for conversion rate, I could potentially use that for banner costs, not just for search. So if you're going to try to work out relationships with third parties, you're going to manage secondary listings or primary listings for that matter, you should really think about, who's going to have access to this data? How am I going to use this data to improve my overall marketing, not just search and or affiliate marketing? How many folks have ever used a performance-based network that wanted a pixel on the thank you page, right? This creates huge possibility for double payment, right? Because what happens is it ends up that your most likely converters are your current customers. And you're often marketing to your current customers through either the fact you have high organic rank, or you're also buying your own brand names and potentially excluding other people from buying those brand names. So you're going to see your own people back a lot. However, anytime you use a third party of any type, anybody down there in that exhibit hall included, who wants their own conversion pixel, unless you're duping for last touch point, you have your likelihood of double payment goes up pretty high. What I mean by that is the easiest way to dedupe is as conversion pixels fire, pass a unique order number into that conversion pixel. That way you can reconcile your data at the end of the month. You can probably even build Excel macros to build just basic Unix scripts to basically mash the data together and figure out what the duplication is, and then look at the timestamp of the earlier activity to see sort of who should get the last touch point credit. And we go off and spend another hour talking about, is it even fair to only give credit to the last touch point? Microsoft has done research on this, and we've done research on it. The reality is there's obviously influence that occurs before that last touch point. But performance-based marketing contracts are usually written like, hey, if I have a pixel set and I see that cookie again when the pixel fires, you owe me money, right? Unless there's some kind of wording in there about deduping for those conversions, you're going to end up potentially on the hook 2, 3, 4 times. It's not unusual to see, an in-house search campaign doing paid search management, right? To see a CJ, right, which is often not exclusive, and then maybe another performance-based deal on top of that. And because active shoppers, your 80-10, 80-20 or 90-10 rule means that your active shoppers, your most frequent visitors, they maybe actually have multiple cookies on their machines. So they're the ones that you're going to see many times. So if you don't have the ability to pass order number into that thank you page pixel that fires, your alternative would be to use some kind of a timestamp revenue binary pair, right? So basically, oh, we got an order at 4:26 p.m. And it had a particular revenue on it. So even if you can't get IP address data, to be able to use that as a third data point, if you can just get timestamp and revenue, you can often do deduping that way. You just want to make sure you don't end up double or triple paying for conversions. We won't name any names, but there are a lot of networks that basically make all their money off of double paying for conversions. Basically, these are conversions that would have happened anyway. It's particularly popular for display networks who charge merchants on a view-through to conversion basis. So don't get me started on view-throughs. I've written several articles on those. So clearly, Google and the search engines are fairly opaque as it is. So if you're going to be doing anything where extra data is collected, you want to try to get as much information as you can. One of the other things that's important to understand about your campaign is something called elasticity. what elasticity is sometimes a small change in bid price results in a big change in position that actually sticks. Right? That means it's inelastic. You get a large change in position for a small change in bid price. Other times you have actually that's elastic. Other times you have an inelastic marketplace, meaning you raise your bid price. Your position doesn't actually change, even if you outbid your competition on an ECPM basis, because they respond to your bid. All right? So certain keywords may be more elastic than other keywords. And the more transparent your data is with regards to third parties, the better you can understand the true elasticity of the marketplace. Meaning, if I want to step on the gas, change my ROI targets, or change my CPO or CPA targets, where am I going to get the biggest bang for my buck moving forward? So there's a lot of factors, obviously, that influence how you take advantage of the extra visibility that secondary listings might provide. But all the analysis that I've done basically seems to indicate that if you're going to go down that path, you should try to find out a way to structure a deal with somebody that provides more transparency to data and not less. Because you're going to end up with a greater overall profitability for that. And along with that, you really just have to never stop doing the segmentation and the testing that goes on in your primary campaign, whether you're learning purely off of the data from your primary campaign or from secondary data sources as well. So there's not a lot of you folks here, so hopefully some of you have questions. I'm going to answer those for you with regards to this topic or any other for that matter. Yeah.
What do you think about when you've got competitive brand? And so you've got 15 paid slots, bringing affiliates in, requesting that they bid below you because you're trying to bid the top spot, but using them to drive the competition off the brand.
Well, I mean, that's one of the reasons that it's good to have the extra sort of, I put friends in the SERP as opposed to enemies. But the question is, how do you do that in a way that doesn't create the bid escalation for you? And how do you compensate those fairly, especially if you're going to have more than one, right? So then how do you decide who's number 2, who's number 3, not in position, but of the additional players, right? And how much incremental distance do you need from a positional perspective to eliminate bid escalation? And that's actually fairly difficult to answer. And if you're running your primaries in a sophisticated manner, which I advocate clearly, other than your brand terms, your other terms may be fairly volatile with regards to what bid prices you bid. Often with brand terms, because you have the highest affinity for the searcher, a particular range of bid prices results in a high level of stickiness for you for top positions. If you're Nordstrom and you're bidding for the keyword Nordstrom, you can usually underbid everybody by a significant amount and you'll still be able to stick in top position because of that.
Wouldn't in time, you allow them to come in and there is a bid escalation because that's probably the biggest fear. You drive the competition off, wouldn't that bid escalation slide down because now your competition is off and so everyone's buying with the same brand term?
No, the thing is, the bid escalation is usually not temporary, right? Most folks who are trying to piggyback on other people's brand equity, they're willing to take that, anytime they can get it and make a positive ROI for themselves, right? So really what you're doing by introducing the additional affiliates in is you're making the bid landscape less elastic, right? Because what's happening is those people will need to bid even more than they ever did before to, quote, steal your traffic, right? So now that's, depending on how aggressive those people you're trying to push out of the way are, right? Your affiliates are either going to have to work harder or less hard. Right? So when they first get in, depending on what kind of technology those other parties or competitors are using, they may react instantly, or they actually may have a lag reaction time because they may be managing it manually, right? So they may suddenly realize that their average position dropped from a 3.2 to a 4.6. They're like, hey, what happened? Right? So then they go in and they start to check. And that's when they may realize, oh, look, there are these other folks involved, and they click on the links and determine that it's an affiliate, and then decide, how aggressive do they want to get. Right? But that creates a fairly dynamic a muddy marketplace. So with regards to the affiliates that you empower to do that, again, the more transparent you are with them, the more control you'll have over that. Right? And if, again, you can try to do that on a performance-based basis, in which case usually it's fairly opaque, right? Like you just say, listen, here's my bid cap. But and again, on brand keywords, a bid cap could work, but on non-branded keywords, you're going to have to come up with something more sophisticated if your primary is sophisticated. So if that helps. Yep.
So I understand that you can't Google results pages anymore without them tracking you and finding out that you're doing that, and they don't like that. And so I'm not sure that's true. I hear that's true. But with that, and then also the opacity that you're saying about the affiliates' operations, what is the best way to control the chaos that you mentioned? And have them do a good job for you, but yet keep it in control and to balance it with, I know it's a huge question, it's really says as well, but what's the best way to control, how can you have any control? It seems like it's completely opaque.
In my experience, the best way to do it is to not structure it as a pure affiliate relationship, right? To structure it as another kind of a compensation partnership. It may still have certain sweeteners for, rev share or whatever, but if you move away from the pure rev share or cost per lead payment model and you move into one where, hey, either potentially I'll even give you the money to spend, right? I've even seen situations where I've got my primary budget, I'm going to give you the secondary budget to manage it because you're really good at search, right? And so I'll even let you participate in what kind of upside we get from you managing my budget B. And I'll pay you X% of that budget, and I'll also pay you some kind of performance incentive, right? Once you do that, right, because now it's your money and not their money, they're much more willing to go to an open relationship, right? So that's one of the ways that I've seen it done, is to sort of move away from a pure performance into some kind of a hybrid deal, so that there's sufficient clarity in data.
Just a small background. There's no way for anyone to know what somebody else's bid price is there?
Nope, not anymore. Those are the good old days of GoTo.com and then Overture. For a while, the bid landscape was fully transparent. And there was actually a tool that you could use, or we could get to that information through the API. We actually used to be able to ping the API on a keyword, and it would feed back the entire bid landscape to us. So it was, back then, bidding algorithms were really trivial compared to what they are now, right? Right now, the only way that you know what the cause-effect relationship is between changes you make to a bid and what happens to the marketplace is to actually test. It's basically like walking around a dark room. Until you hit the wall, you don't know what's there, right? So that's what you're doing in both directions, and that's what more sophisticated bidding algorithms do if they have, if they're either being tasked with raising volume efficiently, like doing an elasticity test, or effectively cutting back budget, right? They'll try to understand either how far can I drop my bid and not lose position, or how much do I have to raise my bid in order to actually gain incremental position, and what's the relative gain cost associated with that. All right, well, that's it. And I don't know where we are on time. I turned my back off so we didn't have static. But feel free to ask me questions up here if you have something you want to share with the remainder of the audience. And I forgot to put copies of my book.